Greetings and welcome to Kapoto 360 podcast. My name is Liam Kanenga and I'm your host. This is a show where we discuss issues around transparency and accountability in the public finance management system of Zimbabwe, paying particular attention to the Auditor General's report as well as the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Public Accounts report on the use of COVID-19 funds, which gave a 180-day deadline in terms of prosecuting all those that were responsible for the misuse of COVID-19 funds, and we are 19 days away towards the lapsing of that deadline. So to delve into today's discussion, I'm joined by Honorable Daniel Molokele of Citizens Coalition for Change and representative for Wanke Central. In discussing today's topic, he will be joining us online. Okay, so good afternoon, Honorable, and welcome to Kapoto 360 podcast. It's a show brought to you by Youth Perspectives Initiative in partnership with Activista Zimbabwe, and it's mainly aimed at discussing issues around transparency and accountability in our public finance management system. And we're giving special attention to the recent Auditor General's report and its recommendations, as well as the Public Accounts Committee's report on COVID-19 funds. And we're also doing a countdown towards their 180 days deadline of prosecuting all responsible culprits for the misuse of COVID-19 funds. So you are welcome today to the show, and I'll be your host.
Thank you so much, Liam. Thank you so much, everyone else who's involved with the production team and the organizations that are part of this initiative. Thank you for hosting me.
The pleasure is all mine, Honorable. So, Honorable, I think for starters, as a legislator in Zimbabwe, what's your general assessment of our public finance management system?
I think at this moment in time, there is a clear gap between the systems that we have in place and the moral values or principles or ethics that we have as Zimbabweans. So you'll find that even if we have systems, we have policies, we have laws, regulations, procedures, in general, at this moment in time, public officials are always finding ways to circumvent whatever is in place. So there is a challenge in terms of accountability and transparency right now.
Okay, so in line with that, do you think that the existent architecture to promote transparency and accountability is sufficient?
There is always room for improvement. There is always opportunity to create even more difficult or harder conditions to make it almost impossible to abuse any public finances. But for me, I don't think the crisis right now in Zimbabwe is about the rules and regulations, the laws and systems. I think it's much more bigger than that. It's about the sense of integrity, the sense of accountability and transparency. It's about moral values and principles. So even if we try to work hard on strengthening the systems and the laws and regulations, we will still fall short, because there is actually a culture of corruption that needs to be addressed, and that is not a legal process. That is not an administrative process. That is a political process. It's about political will to tackle issues around morality, around integrity.
Okay. Speaking of issues to do with political processes, we have seen that, even corruption, like in terms of electoral integrity, has emerged. Contested elections. We don't know even how the tenders are allocated to companies that print the ballot paper, who does maintenance to the biometric voter registration machines. So what's really Parliament's position in terms of that?
I think as parliamentarians, we are very unhappy, especially parliamentarians like myself,
Yes,
who are from the opposition, We are anxious to improve the quality of accountability and transparency, especially in terms of administration of elections in this country.
Yes.
We will have an opportunity. We know that government, through cabinet, recently approved the electoral amendment bill. So we're waiting for it to be gazetted. We're waiting for it to come through the process of parliament, which includes public hearings and so on, and debate in the National Assembly. So we're looking forward to actively participating in deliberate efforts to improve the quality or the independence or the integrity of the Zimbabwe electoral framework, especially with clear focus on the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission.
Okay. And then also again, countless times the Auditor General has recommended that the Zimbabwean Anti-Corruption Commission be given sanctioning powers. And I think this is a recommendation that has lasted since 2018, but we haven't seen any actioning of that recommendation on the part of both the legislature and the executive. What could be the main cause to that?
Again, it speaks to my earlier point around the lack of leadership when it comes to integrity, to morality, because it is actually an issue of political will. Because once you have a leader, a government that says we are giving zero tolerance to corruption, we are promoting accountability and transparency, and they actually mean it, not the empty rhetoric that we see today, the catch and release strategy that we see today, the dramatic strategy that they see just for the face, for the eyes, but the practical stinging of fighting corruption is not there at the moment. So unless and until we get to a point where we have a national leadership, a political leadership that is honestly determined to promote accountability and transparency, that is honestly and passionate about fighting corruption, then you will never come to a point where the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission and indeed other institutions such as the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority, ZIMRA, Zimbabwe Public Police, ZRP, the institutions that are sort of given the responsibility to promote accountability and transparency in the country, including the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. They will never play that role which they're supposed to play. Right now, they are all compromised. They are all politicized. That means they can only go as far as the politics allows them.
Okay. Speaking of them going, of Chapter 12 institutions going as far as politics allows them, we also note that there is a trending scandal, Honorable, around the purchase of laptops, the $9,000 laptops, and even the Clerk of Parliament admitted that some of the parliamentary staff was involved in approving that. What is it that now Parliament is resolved to do to remedy the situation?
Thank you so much. That experience was a really embarrassing one for the Parliament of Zimbabwe, which is supposed to play a watchdog role, is supposed to be a paragon of accountability and transparency. The procurement system of Parliament of Zimbabwe was clearly exposed. And I'm glad to say that the Public Accounts Committee was at the forefront in bringing accountability and transparency with regards to the procurement of laptops. It is obviously a possibility that it is just the tip of the iceberg. So what we are seeing is that the scandal around the laptop gate is going to increase the spotlight on the broader procurement issues around Parliament of Zimbabwe. So it is actually a blessing in disguise that this happened, because now every tender procurements of Parliament of Zimbabwe, they will be put under scrutiny, and we might be able to see an improvement in terms of quality assurance in procurements in tender systems when it comes to the Parliament of Zimbabwe, because parliamentarians would want to ensure that Parliament of Zimbabwe leads from the front when it comes to accountability and transparency, when it comes to fighting corruption. So I think the good news is that the laptop gate scandal has created the necessary spotlight on Parliament of Zimbabwe, and definitely light will chase away darkness.
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable, for that. But also again, public opinion has it that, you know, people that get involved in these things, in most cases, are private players. The private sector is also complicit in the corrupt tender, in the corrupt issuance of tenders. And then people always ask the question, why is it no one is lifting up the corporate veil to punish the individuals that run these corporates in the private sector?
I believe that if we try to address the private sector, we have to address them in the broader sense. For example, with regards to the public procurement system for institutions like Parliament of Zimbabwe, if the systems are watertight, then the private sector is able to adjust to the expectations. So most of the time, the moral blameworthiness of the private sector is linked to the public sector. If the public sector allows for flexibility in terms of cutting corners, then people in the private sector will not be held to high standards of accountability and transparency, because for them, they are profit-making institutions. So once they learn that this is the game that is being played, they will definitely comply. If you go to countries such as Botswana or better countries such as Rwanda, you will see that the private sector level of corruption is not necessarily similar to the one in Zimbabwe, because it's directly linked to the public sector level of corruption. So we must address public sector corruption, and then by so doing, we throw the challenges on private sector. I believe that as long as the public sector is open in terms of corruption, then the private sector is equally going to be affected. Don't expect a higher standard against corruption from the private sector, as long as our public sector is open to abuse.
Okay, Honorable. Then the other question that comes is the continuous normalization of impunity, especially on the part of government across all its three arms, particularly looking at apart from the catch and release issues, the cold casing of corruption cases, especially against government officials, but we are looking at like the Minister of Finance, the minister himself, has had several instances where they borrow money on behalf of the public, but without seeking Parliament's approval. And this has happened currently. I think it's now the third time that it has happened. And so what is then Parliament doing about it, especially in terms of sanctioning?
So it goes back to the issue of political leadership. Yes. Remember that the Minister of Finance is not an elected public official.
Yes.
The Minister of Finance is an appointed public official. That means they actually have a principal. Yes. They are accountable to the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, who is the one who appoints the Minister of Finance. And the President of Zimbabwe is not appointed. He is an elected official. So as long as the President of Zimbabwe is able to allow an appointed official appointed by his own office to do that, then the issue will not revolve around the Minister of Finance. The issue will revolve around the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. So when it comes to issues around lack of adherence to systems, accountability and transparency concerns, or failure to comply, we have to go back to the principle. So political leadership through the office of the President is the real area of concern at this moment in time. We have to question the level of moral integrity and political integrity of the President of the country. That's where the whole concern should be. The President of the country is the one who should be leading from the front. And where you see the Parliament being taken for granted, when you see ministers of government taking the Parliament for granted, like what the Minister of Finance is doing, there is only one person who can put an end to that. And if that person is turning a blind eye, then the Minister of Finance will continue to do so. And that person who should be held accountable is the President of Zimbabwe.
Honorable, based on what you are saying, because I understand that there is what we call the good office politics, where politicians across their lines of affiliations, they can negotiate, but that only happens if the gap of polarization is closed. So based on what you're saying, are you saying that Parliament in and of itself is polarized?
Parliament is not just polarized. Parliament is actually designed in such a way that the opposition does not have enough influence. So whatever the opposition is pushing today, when it comes to voting on a motion, it becomes almost mission impossible. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I'm saying it becomes almost mission impossible because the ruling party parliamentarians, they will be subjected to the whipping system. We have the whipping system in Zimbabwe, both for the ruling party and opposition. So most of the ruling party legislators, they will support a motion if it's being pushed by the ruling party. They will oppose the motion if it's being moved by the opposition. So the whipping system makes it then impossible for a vote of no confidence against the president, who is the leader of the ruling party, to happen.
Okay, now it's becoming more clearer because recently there has been an issue of the unclear accountability span or reportage on the part of the Minister of Finance in terms of the use of the $931 million of the special drawing rights over COVID-19, and part of it is alleged that it was used to purchase ambulances, which we haven't seen. And now, it's just people complain about it, but then we haven't really seen how Parliament is acting towards it. And if Parliament intends to act, what's the plan in terms of ensuring that we get accountability on the SDR money?
Definitely, the Public Accounts Committee would be one avenue. So, but that will need the opposition legislators to be very strong and not be thwarted by the ruling party legislators. The other option will be at the National Assembly, where someone can move a motion to debate that. That will also need the opposition legislators to be very strong and organized. Mostly, it will be more about bringing the spotlight on the matter to make it difficult for the government to relax. But when it comes to initiating something much more punitive, especially against the Minister of Finance, you will see that the whipping system will come in, and the Minister of Finance is protected by the majority number of legislators from the ruling party. This is where the problem is. Because if you are a minister of government and you are guaranteed that you can come to Parliament and rely on the whipping system, then you will not be as obliged to be bound by principles of accountability and transparency, because you know that whatever you will come up with at Parliament, you have the comfort zone of the whipping system where ruling party legislators are not able to hold you accountable, and they will actually support you even if they don't agree with you for political reasons.
Okay.
In fact, it explains why on Wednesday afternoons, when we have our weekly question and answer sessions, questions without notice, a lot of cabinet ministers do not attend that session because the president of the country is the one who is supposed to lead from the front. If he is the one who says to the appointed ministers, I do not tolerate any cabinet minister or deputy minister who ignores the Wednesday afternoon session, then all those cabinet ministers and deputy ministers who have been dodging these sessions will be crowded in Parliament. So the reason why only a few come is because there is no strong political will from the appointing principal, who is the president of Zimbabwe. So as a parliamentarian, when I see the few number of ministers coming to be held accountable, I hold the president of Zimbabwe accountable more than the ministers, because I know that we did not vote for even one of the ministers. Those ministers are appointees, they're not elected officials. So the president is the one who should whip them and say, attend Parliament, be accountable to Parliament. So the moral leadership is from the president.
Okay, because it's really concerning, because we even had this conversation around with my peers in the union that but 6 months, 6 months is 2 semesters, or it's a semester in 2 months for some of us at campus, and a lot happens, politics changes. Even within the last 6 months of 2017, we even saw a president changing. So that is also like what was around our general concern as young people. But then also coming back to that, we want to know then, as you as a representative of the alternative in the August House, the alternative as an institution itself, does it have a clear anti-corruption policy plan going further ahead of 2023, going further ahead of 2028? Because corruption is one of the biggest problems that our country bedeevils in terms of public finance management.
The committee is entitled to make recommendations. Unfortunately, the recommendations can be voted for. They are like motions. Okay. So depending on the interest of the political parties, the flexibility of recommendations is affected or compromised. So your concern of 6 months may be valid, but underlining that recommendation of the committee is the political consideration. So where we are in Zimbabwe, as long as we have a political leadership that is not firm and strong against corruption, you will have committees of parliament coming up with some recommendations that are not watertight, that are not strong, that are flexible, so that the culprits are given room to maneuver.
Okay, because it's really concerning, because we even had this conversation around with my peers in the union that but 6 months, 6 months is 2 semesters, or it's a semester in 2 months for some of us at campus. And a lot happens, politics changes. Even within the last 6 months of 2017, we even saw a president changing. So that is also like what was around our general concern as young people. But then also coming back to that, we want to know then, as you as a representative of the alternative in the August House, the alternative as an institution itself, does it have a clear anti-corruption policy plan going further ahead of 2023, going further ahead of 2028? Because corruption is one of the biggest problems that our country bedeevils in terms of public finance management.
I said from the start that I'm not inspired by the plans or strategies. I'm not inspired by the policies and documents. I'm not inspired by the systems. I'm inspired by the values and the principles.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, the challenge for Zimbabwe, remember, Zimbabwe is one of the youngest population in the countries in the world. It's one of the most youthful countries in the world. The challenge of Zimbabwe today is that the majority of the people who are in political positions, including parliamentarians, are not youthful. Cabinet is one of the oldest cabinets in the world. Yet Zimbabwe is one of the most youthful countries in the world. So we have a generation gap where you have the majority of the elderly people taking all key strategic decisions of the country. And you have the majority of youths not taking any policy or decision-making role. And that then affects us, because the youth are the ones that are more worried about the future. The youth are the ones that are more worried about going forward.
Yes.
The elderly are more worried about the past. They are not going to be emotional about 2050, 2060. So we need to see a change in terms of youth leadership, youth participation, so that even the 2023 elections, they create a political leadership that is more youthful than the current one. And then we would then expect the more youthful political leaders, whether they're in parliament or cabinet, to push the agenda for the future of the country, for sustainable development of Zimbabwe, because they are young enough to worry about the future. Unlike the current ones who are old enough not to worry more about the future, but to focus more on the past. They have nothing to lose. Their time is almost on.
Yeah, that's very profound. Honorable, now that we are out of time and we are summing up our session, we need to know, what's your message to the young people of Zimbabwe, especially that we are headed towards 2023 elections? What's your message to us, the young people of Zimbabwe?
There is a country that is our twin country from a colonial point of view. That country is called Zambia.
Yes.
They had an election in August 2021, an election that ushered in a new political leadership, a much more youthful political leadership. And Zambia, more than a year after the elections, there is clarity in terms of direction. So I want to challenge the youth of Zimbabwe, because if you look at the election process in Zambia in August 2021, one of the key outcomes of that election was the role of the young people the young people were very decisive in making sure that there was a new ruling party in Zambia. So I want to challenge the youth of Zimbabwe. The statistics at the moment seem to be pointing to youth voter apathy. So we need the young people to come up with all sorts of strategies to encourage other youths to register to vote. Not only to register to vote, to make sure that come election day, there are strategies to mobilize young people to go out in their numbers and vote. And more importantly, to encourage as many young people to contest as candidates so that they have opportunity for leadership. And then also after the elections, to make sure that the youth are at the forefront, just like the youth in Zambia, to defend the outcome of the electoral process, to protect the integrity of the electoral process of Zimbabwe, so that those who are elected are truly democratically elected. So young people, this is the challenge of your own generation, to make sure that the country moves forward through the electoral process of Zimbabwe. Elections are supposed to give Zimbabwe renewal of opportunity for its potential in terms of development. And youths are the ones that give us hope for the future. So elections and youths go hand in hand. We need more young people to be involved with elections 2023. And as more youths get involved, we are able to secure the future of the country. We will be able to secure the future of the country.
Wow, that was very profound. And thank you once again, Honorable. And thank you for giving us your time. It was quite enlightening to have you as a guest on the show. We hope to keep engaging with you ahead of more episodes of Kapoto 360 podcast as we discuss issues to do with transparency and accountability. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time. So that was Honorable Daniel Molokele, who cited issues to do with polarization within Parliament as an institution, the lack of political will among its politicians in terms of policing transparency and accountability in public finance management, as well as the moral decadence that is grappling the country at the moment. And also, again, he gave as a unique observation that the political whip systems are too strong such that they silence the role of Parliament in terms of promoting transparency and accountability. And that was it for today's show. My name is Liam Kanenga. I was your host, and this was Kapoto 360 podcast. See you next time.